Okay, my name's Kate Clow. I came to Turkey first in 1989. I fell in love with it, not because of the cities, not because of the people, not because of the commerce or the business or anything, because of the history, because of the old roads, because of the old sites. Turkey has been occupied since the dawn of time. It's been the bridge between Asia and Europe forever and ever. And Lycia is only a small part of Turkey, but the whole of Turkey is too big for me. So when I decided I wanted to make a walking route in Turkey, Lycia was the obvious area to do it in, because it's coastal, because it has the most beautiful mountains sweeping down to the sea, because it has some tourism potential but not too much, because it's easily accessible, and because I liked it. So I moved to Antalya and started looking for old roads. And in those days, there were no maps because the Turkish military maps were secret. Um, there were no GPSs. This was in the 1980s, and at that time, hardly anyone had a GPS, and the data, anyway, was scrambled by the Americans. Thank you very much, darlings. And so, to find the Lycian Way, to find the old roads, I walked. And my Turkish was terrible at that time, but I kept bumping into shepherds, and they looked after me, and they showed me old roads, and they thought I was mad. But never mind. In the end, I had the route organised, and we put together the Lycian Way. And it opened in 1999. And by 2005, it was having regular business from all over Europe, from America, Canada, Australia, all over the world. From the English-speaking world, I should say, mainly, and the European world. So it was a success, and it was a success fairly quickly. And part of the reason that it was a success was because the villagers along the route saw the opportunity, used their initiative, and started inviting people into their homes. Then they started building on extra bedrooms. Then they thought, oh yes, what about a bathroom too? Then they started working with tour companies, and gradually they had developed small businesses all the way along the route. And now you can say that any night on the route you can find somewhere to stay in a village, or between villages, or independent places to stay. And mainly organised, managed, and supported by local people. So give them some respect when you stay in their villages. Remember, they created their own businesses from nothing. They created them to provide a service for people like you who want to walk. And they deserve some sympathy and some respect and some consideration, because it's not very easy when you're a shepherd or a farmer or a housewife, or when you to go from looking after your own chickens and your own animals and your own little farm to welcome strangers into your home. But they did it, and mostly they've done it successfully, and I'm very grateful to them, and I think everyone should be too. Okay, so let me tell you something about the women on the Lycian Way. Well, the Turkish women in general. Turkish women don't look very powerful. They look as though they spend a lot of their time running around after their sons and their husbands and their fathers, and they don't seem to have any time for themselves. But in fact, the house is theirs. The men would not dare to do anything in the house without the permission of the woman. And it's the duty of the men to support the woman in maintaining the house. So although the men dominate the tea houses, the shops, the businesses, the streets and everything, the women dominate the home. And So an outsider doesn't get much idea about the power of women. And it's changing now very much, because when a couple marry now, normally both of them have to work. And so the power dynamics within the family are changing quite a lot. The Lycian way has also changed the power dynamics in the family, because if you want to set up a pension or a restaurant or a cafe or even a campsite, it's the women who are the ones that matter. No man would ever dare to try and set up anything to do with his home, or to do with feeding people, or to do with a campsite or anything like that, without his wife's permission. So the women make the decisions, because in the end, the women will actually do a lot of the work. And so it's in those such situations that you meet Turkish women, not outside on the street, not on the path, not on the in the shops or anything, but in the pensions, in the restaurants, in the cafes, and so on. And there's a lot of solidarity from a woman to woman basis. So if you're a woman walker, you can rely on any Turkish woman to support you and help you. If you are in any problems at all, they'll look after you. But the women in the villages themselves are always quarrelling with the other women. This is partly because they're all related to each other. They come from similar families with similar backgrounds, shared interests, shared grandfathers. And the quarrels are nearly all about inheritance. They're nearly all about, oh, my grandfather should have left me this piece of land and he left it to my sister. My grandfather should have done that. I shouldn't have married this guy because he has no land, and blah, 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 blah. It's all about inheritance and money. And there's a huge amount of jealousy between the families in the village. But you don't know it as an outsider. It's quite hidden. It's quite secret. So the Lycian way has given women a lot of opportunities. It's given them the opportunity to develop businesses in their own homes, and to invite people in, to meet people that they wouldn't meet in other situations. And it's given them a stimulus to learn a bit about the outside world, and also to practice their skills in cooking and homemaking. And many of them are very good at it. But it hasn't strengthened the relationships between the families in the villages. And this drives me absolutely bloody crazy. I cannot see why the women in a village can't cooperate with each other, but they don't. And there's very little I can do to encourage them to cooperate, or to force them to cooperate, or anything. But believe you me, because of this, they lose out on business, they lose out on their social life, and they lose out on their potential. Okay. As you can see, this is a spring, and the water's cold and fresh. Most of the Lycian way runs over limestone, and the characteristic of limestone mountains is that the water disappears underground very, very quickly. Limestone is soluble, and so it makes its own channels and disappears into the bowels of the earth. So the Lycian way is dependent on springs like this, where the water re-emerges. It's cold. And these springs have been used for years. Most of these springs, bits of pottery around them, because people carried jars made out of pottery to fetch the water, and of course sometimes they break. So you find bits of pottery scattered all around springs. Here, another piece there. Right. But because of climate change, because the snow doesn't last as long on the mountains, because the winter temperatures are higher than they used to be, because the summers are really, really hot, then the water situation on the Lycian way is getting worse. It's become a place where the water is really the water doesn't run at the end of the year. From August, September, October. It's very difficult to find fresh running water like this on the Lycian Way. This will dry up in 3 or 4 months, and maybe a drip, 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 but it won't be enough to fill a water bottle. And many of the other springs along the route are the same. So it's changed the pattern of agriculture. It's reduced the possibilities for agriculture, and it's caused a drift to the towns, because if you can't grow your traditional crops, then what alternative do you have but it's to go and make a living in the cities? So areas like this, where people used to farm tobacco, and also down in the valleys particularly grow cotton, these are water intensive crops, and they've gone. They've completely disappeared from the area within the last 20 or 30 years. And in fact, more and more areas are just not cultivated at all. They may be grazed by goats during the spring, but once the temperatures rise in June, July, and so on, there's no food left for the goats, and they're not used again until the winter rains start in November or something. So climate change is having a huge effect on Turkey. The rainfall per square metre is decreasing horrendously. The water that is extracted from the ground is more than the water is being put into it through rainfall. The water table is dropping, and in central Turkey particularly, it's a disastrous situation, really, really horrendous. And the water authorities, the government, everyone is really, especially the small farmers, the villagers and so on, they are really well aware of this, and nobody is doing very much about it. There is almost no grey water recycling. There is almost no campaigns to preserve water, take care of water, not misuse water or anything like that. And so Turkey, within a very short time, I think, is going to be suffering terribly from lack of fresh water. And don't forget, this is this country where the Tigris and the Euphrates are born, where they rise from the earth. And the Tigris and the Euphrates are the major rivers of the Middle East. And from Turkey, they wind from northern Turkey down to the south border of Turkey, and then into Syria and Iraq, across the Middle East, before they emerge on the Persian Gulf. And they are the sources of water for the whole of the Middle East. So damage to these river systems is the most horrendous, has the most horrendous effect on the lives of not just the Turks, but of everyone downstream, everyone in all of the Arab countries. And in fact, damage to the Euphrates was one of the key causes of the Syrian war, and the Iraq economy is also suffering from damage to waterways. The whole water system of the Middle East is being thoughtlessly damaged, and because of climate change, it's not going to be easily restored. So things look really bad for the Middle East, for eastern Turkey, for the whole central plateau of Turkey, and even for something as small as the Lycian Way. Okay. I'm sitting on a stone seat. It was part of the council chamber of the city of Sidyma, which was a Lycian city founded in about 400 years BC, and was probably abandoned in about 900 AD. And now the people who are living in it are Turkish, mainly from a particular religious sect, the Süleymaniye, and there are only about 30 or 40 people living on top of the ruins in this site. So I'm in the theatre, which is cut into the side of a hill, and I'm looking across the valley bottom, and I can see on the opposite hill, I can see the graveyard, many graves along the base of the hill. Above the graves, there was an area where stone was mined. At the bottom of the valley, there are two great, big, huge temple tombs. At the time, there was a store, a marketplace, lots of buildings, and all around there were terraced fields where people grew olives, corn, grapes, timber, and all the usual things that you need to keep a town like this in a state of prosperity. And Sidyma was only about 15 or 20 kilometers from the capital of Lycia, which was Xanthos. And of course, there was at least one, there were 2 or 3 roads between Sidyma and Xanthos. And as well as those roads, there are about 6 other roads that met at Sidyma. So we know it was quite a lively community, but had lots of road traffic going to it and from it, people carrying out business. It was probably also a summer residence for many of the people from Xanthos who didn't want to live in the river valley during the summer during the mosquito season. So they probably moved up here to Sidyma, where it's about 500 meters and much much cooler in summer and much better from the point of view of mosquitoes. So this community flourished for 1200 years, 1500 years, and was part of the Lycian Empire at first, then part of a Roman province, and then part of a Byzantine kingdom, or empire, I should say, really. So when it was eventually abandoned, at that point it had 6 churches. So it was flourishing, and to have 6 churches, it must have had a population of a few thousands probably. And now 30 people. So you can see the difference between now and then. So the Lycian Way was built to, or created, or rediscovered, if you like, to join up these Lycian cities. And along the whole length of the Lycian Way, there's about 25 or 30 of settlements of the Lycian period. Some big, some small, some like this one, which are still have people living over the top of them, but mostly abandoned and lying in woodland or on a hilltop or by a coast with no inhabitants and just casual visitors. 6 or 7 of them are major historical sites. They have archaeologists working on them. They have museums attached to them. They have been properly excavated, and the sites, the best parts of the finds have been put into museums, and so on and so on. So the tour guides will take you around them and tell you the whole of the story of this particular village, town, city, mainly city. Lycia was a coastal region, and so it was very reliant on the sea, both for trade, but also for things like food, fish, and so on. The fish must have been flourishing in those days in a way that they're not now. And the ships that went round Lycia were part of the regular traffic from Egypt to Rome, or from Egypt to Greece. carrying mainly corn from the east to feed the populations of Rome and Greece, but also carrying a huge amount of other goods as well. We know that copper, for example, was traded between the coast of Syria, Cyprus, and along the Lycian coast on its way to the Greek islands and on to Rome as well. We know that other precious metals were carried along. The earliest shipwreck we have off this coast was dated to the reign of the Queen Nefertiti of Egypt, and it's probably about 1400 BC, and it carried in amongst the possessions that were found on it. It was carried her signet ring, so we know that she sent a messenger on that ship to the ports of Lycia, and the ship was wrecked during in a storm, presumably, before it actually arrived at its destination. So the coast was very important. The inland from the coast were cedar trees, and we all think about the cedar trees of Lebanon, which were part of the economy of the ancient world, and they were written about in the Bible and so on. But the cedar trees of Lycia were equally important, because the cedar trees closest to the coast were only 10 kilometers inland. So you could easily move timber from the mountains of Lycia to the ports, and then from the ports to Egypt. And it was probably the most valuable timber in the world. Egypt didn't have any natural timber resources, so it was a good part, an important part of the circular trade: wheat, timber, metals, going round and round the Mediterranean. And then you add the luxury goods on top of that: wine, precious metals, and military equipment, all sorts of other things. And you can see that the Mediterranean was an absolute hub of activity. So the roads of Lycia linked the settlements, but they weren't used as much as the sea. The only problem with the sea was that the sailing season was only between March and November. And so if you wanted to travel in winter, you needed roads. If you wanted to defend your coast against a foreign navy, you needed roads. So many of the roads ran fairly close to the sea. Others were major roads connecting the capital at Xanthos with the other major settlements. But the Lycian Way mainly follows the ancient coastal roads. So the roads it runs on are, the earliest was probably dating from about 500 BC, and the latest from the Byzantine time. So they span a period of about 1,000 years. They were constructed in stone. The surface was cobbled with stone, and often they've continued in use until present days. Now, of course, the roads on flat areas of land have disappeared because they've disappeared under mud or sand or agriculture, or even under new roads, present day roads. But in the mountains, these roads are still visible. So the Lycian Way is a mountainous route. So don't think it's easy. But it's a very nice route. A lot of it follows above the coast, above the bays, above the waves, partly through forest, partly over the tops of mountains, partly going down to beaches. But every part of it has been used for thousands of years, we can say. And I still want the history of the route to be remembered, as well as the beauty of the route, the interest of the route, the scenery, the viewpoints, and so on. To me, the thing that matters is the history.